Hey everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks a lot for tuning into a new episode of Rock and Read. Today we'll read chapter 14 of The Lives of Brian by AC/DC's longtime lead singer, Brian Johnson. Without further ado, let's check out chapter 14. The house was in Preston Grange, a posh suburb near Tynemouth Golf Club. I could never have afforded anything like it on my own. It was brand new with big modern windows, central heating, a garage, a driveway, and back garden. The perfect home for a young middle-class family. It seemed too good to be true. Honestly, given how few records Geordie had been selling since our one and only top 10 hit. Then again, I told myself, Ellis was getting a new album in return, and it certainly wasn't unheard of in those days for a band like ours to make a mid-career comeback, even if Vic, the guy who had been the driving force behind it all, was now gone. It was going to be a tricky balancing act, though. On one hand, we needed to move on from the old Geordie and end the comparisons with Slade. But on the other hand, we also didn't want to lose our old fans, or what few of them we had left. Redbus was at least taking the project seriously, which you could tell by the fact that they had hired Philip "Pip" Williams as the producer. He had previously worked with the Kinks and the Moody Blues, and would go on to produce Status Quo's "Rockin' All Over the World." So, we were in good hands. But of course, Redbus, always trying to save money, had given us only a few days of studio time. And because work on the songs had started before Vic was fired, the material was all over the place. The lead single was "She's a Teaser," a tight, hard-rocking number, but with a lot of brass added in the studio, which made it sound like a bit of a sellout. That song had been finished long before the main album sessions began. By the time I got to London to record the vocals, all the backing tracks had already been done. That in itself should have been a warning sign. I mean, there was just no band spirit at all. Then, when Pip played the tapes back for me, I couldn't hide the look of disappointment on my face. "I know what you're thinking," said Pip. "They're not quite there yet. That's why you're here." The next few days were the closest that I'd ever worked with a producer before, and it gave me a lot of respect for what it takes to do that job. I mean, to be a good producer, you've got to be a United Nations-worthy diplomat, a musical genius, and a technical wizard, all in one. Pip was all of those things and more. He also looked the part, wearing this fabulous buckskin jacket with all the tassels on the arms, like something an American frontiersman would have worn. It was the coolest, most rock and roll piece of clothing that I had ever set eyes on. So there I was with the words and a rough idea of the melody, and I just had to make it work. And of course, the first few times I went through it, I was just trying to get to the end without messing it up. That's always the way, unless you wrote the song yourselves. Then after that, I started to loosen up, improvise a bit, have some fun. The beautiful thing about Pip was that he could read my mood and adapt accordingly. He'd be like, "Let's have a break, Brian. We've worked long enough. Do you think you could manage another hour after dinner? I don't like singers to sing after dinner." Of course, I was still a young man then, so I was thinking, I can sing after anything. The worst parts of it all were the meal times, because I couldn't afford to eat out. Pip would name a restaurant that he wanted to go to, then he'd look in my face and go, "Oh, is it expensive there?" I ended up bringing sandwiches to avoid the issue. I mean, eating out at restaurants wasn't something that I was used to anyway. Even at the height of Jordy's success, when we were on top of the pops every other week, a meal out for us was stopping at a Little Chef roadside cafe on the A1, or the inevitable Indian restaurant. Mind you, not even the finest of Michelin-starred cuisine could compete with the Little Chef Olympic breakfast when you were starving at 6 a.m. after driving all night. We recorded about a dozen tracks in 3 days, after which Pip invited me out for a drink to celebrate. I'd love to, Pip, I told him, but my train home leaves at 7 p.m., so I'd better get going. Well, you're cutting it close, he said, checking his watch. Come on, let's get you a black cab. I'll take the tube, Pip. It's all right. You'll never get there on time on the tube, Brian. They're on strike anyway. You need a cab. That was when I had to admit that I only had enough money for the underground fare and a beer and sandwich on the way home. Pip told me not to say another word. Then he fished into his pocket and pulled out a 20-pound note, the equivalent of about 150 pounds today. I told him that I couldn't possibly take that amount of money, but he shoved it into my jeans pocket. Brian, please, he said. I want you to take it. A couple minutes later, we were standing outside, waiting for a cab. Pip pointed to my faded denim jacket, which must have dated back to the days of the Gobi Desert Canoe Club. It was old and falling apart. How long have you had that? He asked. I'm not sure, I shrugged. Why? Try this on, he said, taking off his own jacket, the fabulous buckskin one. You'll look good in it. Pip, I can't take the jacket off your own back, I protested. I've only known you for 3 days. And look at that thing. Where did you get it? It must have cost an arm and a leg. 3 days in a studio is a long time, Brian. We're friends now. And the jacket suits you better. Pip, I can't. I just can't. I'm fine. Stop giving me things. Then a cab pulled up and Pip dropped the jacket on the floor in front of me and walked away. I'll be seeing you, Brian, he called out over his shoulder. Safe travels home. And take the jacket. You're a rock star, so you should dress like one. That was a special moment for me. I felt like I was stealing it when I picked it up and put it on. And of course, it made everything else that I was wearing look filthy and worn out, especially my shoes. King's Cross Station, I told the driver through the window. He nodded okay, and I climbed into the back, while hoping to God that my brother Maurice would be on the train. If you're wondering why Maurice hasn't featured more in this book, it's because he was away most of the time. At the age of 15, when I was just starting full-time at Parsons, he decided that he wanted to be a chef and went to work at the County Hotel, opposite Newcastle Central Station. They made him work as a bellboy first. Then he moved up to become a commis waiter, or an apprentice waiter, and from there he became a commis chef. He'd even practice at home. Boiled potatoes, ma'am, he'd say to my ma as he doled out Sunday lunch, and would ma'am care for some carrots? Then one night we found him packing his bags. He told us that he was going to Jersey in the Channel Islands to work at a much bigger hotel in the main town there, St. Helier. It was the first that any of us had ever heard of it, because Maurice didn't speak much. There were no fond farewells. He just got on the train and went. Next thing we knew, he'd come back and bought himself a mod-style Lambretta scooter, silver, twin-chrome tailpipes, and the spare wheel on the back. It was fabulous. Although the first time I borrowed it to go to the pictures, someone nicked the spare wheel, which I still feel bad about to this day. Then off Maurice went again, returning this time with a Triumph Spitfire sports car. I remember coming home and seeing it parked outside our house and going, "Whose is that?" Nobody had anything like it on our estate. Then Maurice appeared, but I hardly recognized him because he had grown another foot and had a mustache. Before he took me for a ride in the car, he had the leather gloves, the herringbone cloth cap, the whole old-school driving get-up. He made me take off all my dirty work clothes and wash my hands. Twice. I didn't blame him. What a glorious machine that Spitfire was. It had all the dials, gauges, and buttons, even indicator stalks, and when you changed gears, the engine made all these satanic woofling noises. I was in awe of Maurice. I'd always been a good student at school, until the end anyway, and I worked at one of the world's best engineering companies while earning money from gigs on the side, but I was flat broke. Meanwhile, Maurice, who had failed every test ever put in front of him, was driving around in this. But that's the thing with Maurice. He plays dumb, but he's smarter than anyone. And he's the most lovable guy you could ever meet. For as long as I can remember, people have been coming up to me saying, "How's Maurice? I love Maurice." He's just one of those guys. Anyway, after coming back from Jersey for good, Maurice got himself a job as chief steward on the London to Newcastle train service in the first class section. And if you found yourself on the same train as him, even in the cheapest seat you could buy, he would always look after you. Everybody looked after everybody's family in those days. It was an unspoken rule. But Maurice, being a lovely lad, extended the courtesy to friends too. My great pal, Brendan Healy, who often had to go to London for auditions, there'll be more on Brendan and his many talents later on, used to call him the Good Samaritan of King's Cross. I heard Maurice's voice before I saw him. "Brian?" Instant relief. Then I looked around and saw him hanging out of the first-class carriage. "Are you going to a Cowboys and Indians fancy dress party?" he asked, staring at my jacket. "Off, Maurice," I smiled. "Come on then, get yourself in here." It was a well-oiled routine with Maurice. You'd walk purposely past the restaurant car, ticket in hand, as if heading to your seat in economy class. Then a service door would open next to you, and you'd duck inside. Then you'd sit against the wall in the kitchen, out of sight, smoking a cigarette until the train started to move. A nod and a wink would be exchanged. Then you'd be ushered to a window seat in the dining carriage, with a white tablecloth in front of you, and proceed to enjoy a silver-service steak dinner with as many beers as you could drink. "Boiled potatoes, sir?" Maurice would ask with a flourish, to ensure that none of the paying passengers suspected what was going on. "And would sir care for some carrots?" The best part of the journey, of course, was when the train crossed the River Tyne to Central Station. Those last few seconds giving you the most spectacular view of the Tyne Bridge, all lit up from underneath. That was the beautiful thing about the King's Cross to Newcastle train service. It made coming home feel so good. The album vanished without a trace. There were no survivors. Not even a lifebelt was found. But unlike the case of the Mary Celeste, this was no mystery. The album was just... The marketing of it had also been pretty dire, mind you. Redbus's solution to the problem of Geordie needing to move on without alienating our old fans was to make it a faceless album with a cover featuring a woman flying out of the earth, holding up a shining light. The title was Save the World, featuring Brian Johnson. But of course, the album didn't save anything. Not the world, certainly not Geordie. I remember Maurice driving over to the house in Preston Grange one morning asking, "So, what's happening with the record? I've heard Nowton on the radio." I told him that it hadn't been officially released yet, which it hadn't. But of course, an album would usually be hyped through the roof long before it came out. But neither of the two singles we'd released, She's a Teaser and Goodbye Love, had even come close to bothering the charts. "Can I at least hear it?" asked Maurice. "I don't have a copy," I shrugged. And it was true. I mean, it was hard to care when no one else did. People often ask me how and when Jordy eventually broke up, but the truth is, we never really did. There was no big argument or walkout. We didn't lose anyone to drink or anything. We were never even dumped by our record company. It all just kinda fizzled out. Well, that's the end of chapter 14. Let me know what you thought of this chapter in the comments below. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Till then, rock on.